Welcome to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on the Sunrise, and I'm very excited to be here because we're going to be sharing a lot of fun and interesting information with you today. Okay, and it is in fact a beautiful Tuesday morning. It's second day of the week, and also the second day since restrictions were eased. So that means we have a lot to look forward to, and obviously, moving forward, this means that we get used or we get we adjust to how much there is a lot of change within society right now. So obviously that is something to be excited about. Restrictions were lifted just yesterday, and obviously it's very exciting. It's very interesting to be alive in these times, right? As annoying as it is, or as much as we've had to adjust to all of the different things, all of the different changes that we've had to go through, obviously we can get used to the way things are right now as well, right? So obviously that is something to be, it's something to be excited about. It's something to for you to look forward to. So that is why you should stay tuned to Relax Radio, because we talk about everything, the latest news from what happens in the United Kingdom to whatever happens all over the world. Make sure you stay tuned because we give you the best of content. We always want to make sure that you're updated, you're informed about what else is going on. So do make sure to stay tuned, right? Now, before we head back into the conversation, I actually want to very quickly remind you that you can, in fact, go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Go make sure you follow those and make sure you share our posts, share our, videos with your friends and everything. Make sure to pass the word because it's going to be absolutely amazing. It's definitely going to help you, stay informed, but also it's going to help your friends stay informed. So that is something to be excited about, right? And what we need to do, before we head into the conversation, something else that you can do is also to download the app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. Make sure to download those and make sure to have it on your phone or your iPad or whatever it is, because that way you can be a part of this conversation at any time of the day from anywhere in the world. Okay. So make sure you do that. Now, something else that you can do, or something else that you can actually do basically to make sure you stay in touch with us, or if you want to share your thoughts, your opinions with me, well, the best way for you to do that is in fact to text me on 07852473473. Text me and be a part of the show. Share your thoughts, share your experience, whatever it is that you want to share with me. Make sure you go ahead and do that. But right now we're actually talking about what exactly happens when therapy makes things worse. Okay. And this is a question that a lot of us have. This is a question that we really need to focus on as well, because a lot of us go for therapy, right? A lot of us have therapists, and it's normal in this day and age to actually go and meet a therapist so you can talk about your problems. I mean, that's what therapy is about, right? It's about overcoming all these problems, overcoming all the trauma that you in fact had to go through when you were a child and whatnot. That's not necessarily what therapy is all about, but at least a part, or rather an aspect of therapy is about that, right? So what exactly happens when you go to the therapist, and the therapist, instead of making your problems better, just makes it worse for you, and not just for you, for multiple other patients as well, right? Now, this is a problem that we have, or problem that exists within our health system, right? Because a lot of these therapists, psychoanalysts, a hypnotherapist, counselor, those are in fact unprotected terms in the United Kingdom. So because of that, we don't actually know what exactly they do, how exactly it works. Like, of course, you know that when you say hypnotherapy, you hypnotize people, and then you basically get them to talk about all those difficult instances, difficult situations they were in, right? However, having said that, there is still a lot of unknown things that are there, that are existent within our health system, especially in terms of mental health, in terms of therapists and whatnot. And that is why we have this question, what exactly happens if you go near the therapist, you tell the therapist your problems, and after you tell the therapist your problems, what basically happens is the fact that they just make it worse. They don't actually help you, get over that problem, get over that issue, because what happens is they just keep making it worse for you, right? Now, this is a huge problem that is there within the health system, because therapists are in fact meant to help people change their lives, right? But those who behave badly may actually end up doing more harm than good for all these people who go to therapy. So that's why I want to tell you this story of this woman called Courtney. And obviously, that's not her real name. These are, anonymous names to protect their identity and, protect, basically to protect their identity, right? So Courtney actually started seeing a psychoanalyst all the way back in 2018, okay? And she thought it was very strange that her therapist actually asked her to follow her or follow him on Instagram. So she began seeing Michael, who is the therapist, or rather the psychoanalyst, who had written books and appeared on television to treat her fear of flying all the way back in 2018. And basically, what happened was after a few sessions, he suggested that the pair connect on Instagram, where he posted everything from mindfulness tips to topless gym selfies, literally everything. And what happened was she wasn't someone who used that app a lot, right? Courtney didn't use that app much. So she basically shrugged off her concern and continued therapy, discussing her childhood abuse, depression, anxiety, and even her sex life, right? And what happened was around 5 months after she had begun seeing this psychoanalyst, Michael actually asked her if she had been offended by a message she had sent, okay? And Courtney was very confused and she was like, oh, what message? Because I honestly haven't seen any message. And if you're someone like her and if you're someone like me and you barely use your Instagram, you wouldn't really know what goes on in there, because I've taken off my notifications for all of the social media apps I use. So unless I go there, I don't really know what happens. I don't really know who texts and who says what unless I actually go on the app. Okay. And I think that was the same for her as well. And when he asked her what message, or rather when she asked him what message he was talking about, he had actually demanded that she go and open the message right in front of him, okay? And that made her very, very uncomfortable, because obviously, therapy isn't about, you don't just go there and talk about, hey, did you follow me, hey, did you see the message I sent, or whatnot, because that's not what therapy is about, right? So then you sort of, then she started having these doubts, these questions, these uncertainties as to whether he was actually being professional, if he was going beyond that line of professionalism. Because when it comes to therapy, when it comes to you talking about your problems, regardless of whether it's a psychoanalyst, a therapist, and whatnot, obviously what we need to keep in mind, or what we need to remember, is the fact that sometimes it's very hard to figure out what exactly is hurtful or harmful and what exactly is not, right? Because therapy in itself is a process where you talk about these things you're uncomfortable about, right? It's this place where you talk about your problems, you talk about everything, right? And they're going to, obviously when therapy happens, you're going to be some uncomfortable questions. However, even though you ask those uncomfortable questions, it's for most therapists out there, I have to say, it's clearly with the intention of making sure that they understand how your mind works, they understand the emotions and feelings you're going through, and that they try to help you through that, right? So obviously, when this guy asked her if she had seen his message, she was like, no, you know what, I haven't. And then he forced her to go and look at it right in front of him, right? So basically that is her story. And obviously, there was it escalated, and there was a lot of other issues as well. But Michael, or this psychoanalyst, basically he was a psychoanalyst and had training in hypnotherapy, right? So obviously, when Courtney was looking up for him online, and she was looking for his credentials, she didn't actually scrutinize it rather, because she thought, you know what, it's good enough for me. So you know what, I'm just gonna go near this therapist, right? And what she said was that she had assumed that all therapists more or less had the exact same capabilities, that exact same training. And it's basically about being able to understand someone, being able to, or having that sort of environment, having that sort of aura around you that people feel comfortable opening up to you, right? And that's what she thought about this therapist as well. So there is something that you need to remember, something important that you need to keep in mind, especially here in the United Kingdom. Now there are a few terms that are in fact unprotected, right? So terms like psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, therapist, hypnotherapist, and counselor are all unprotected terms here in the United Kingdom, and there is no statutory regulation of therapists, because that's just how the system works, right? You can actually legally call yourself any of these titles without any training. And that's what, Courtney thought as well. He calls himself a therapist, and I'm gonna assume that because he's a therapist, that he has the necessary credentials, he has the necessary training, and that he's actually someone good. And so she went to it. And in instances like that, you can't actually blame the person who goes near this therapist, right? Because a lot of us, we go to the doctor because we assume, the doctor is going to help us. The doctor has enough training that can help us be better from better from, or feel better from whatever is the disease that we're going through. And because of that, that's why we go near the doctor. So it's the exact same situation with a therapist as well, right? Basically, when you go near a therapist, what happens is that, um basically, when you go to a therapist, what happens is you tell them your problems, and they say, you know what, look, it's okay, you can talk to me about it, I'm going to help you out. And then you open up to that person and tell your problems, right? So exactly in that same way, where we go near a doctor and we ask for help, that's the exact same way we go near a therapist and we ask for help, right? So it's very, very important for us to remember that just because you go near a therapist, just because you tell your problems to a therapist, that doesn't mean that they can in any way make you feel uncomfortable, make you feel like you're not good enough, or make you feel like your problems are not big enough for this world. Like, that's the exact opposite of therapy. Like, what are you doing, So that is a huge problem that we have right here in the United Kingdom. And that is why we will be talking about it, because there have been so many instances where people have gone to therapy and the therapist has turned out to be very, very detrimental to their health. The therapist has in fact made things much, much harder for them. So make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break, and after that we will be back to keep talking to you about what happens when therapy makes things worse.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education, or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account. And then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different. Huh? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country. To be fair, different countries have different tax laws, so with different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies and then you step up into different things.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And I'm very, very excited to be here because we're having a very important conversation on this beautiful Tuesday morning about therapy, right? We're having a very, very important conversation because right now, therapy is something that is more often than not abused or misused by the people that we go to for help, right? For example, if you go near a therapist for help, then chances are you're probably going to end up in a lot more trouble than you initially did simply because your therapist is not who you thought they were, right? And that's a huge problem that is currently there in the United Kingdom right now. So that is why we are discussing this problem, right? So, one thing we need to keep in mind when we're discussing is that a lot of the terms such as psychoanalyst, hypnotherapist, therapist, psychotherapist, and counselor are in fact unprotected terms here in the United Kingdom, which means that you can legally call yourself any of these titles without any training. And that means, or rather, that is a big issue right here in the system, simply because of the fact that for you to treat someone's mental illnesses, you have to make sure that they're qualified enough. You have to make sure that they're good enough to do that, because otherwise it can actually result in a lot of harm for people with mental health issues, right? So earlier we were talking about Courtney, we were talking about her issue and how her therapist was acting really weird when she went for their sessions. But before we get back into that conversation, before we head back into that story, I want to very quickly remind you that you can in fact be a part of the show. All you need to do is just text me on 078 to share your thoughts, your opinions, your experiences with me, because that is something I absolutely love, that I would absolutely love to hear, right? And make sure you do that. And don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. you know it's definitely going to help you stay informed and updated about everything that happens, not just here in the United Kingdom, but around the rest of the world as well. So make sure you do that, because it's definitely going to help you so much, right? And also don't forget to download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, which means that you can download it on either your iOS device or even your Android device and listen in from anywhere in the world. Okay, so make sure you do that. But right now, let's actually get back into our conversation, which is about what do you do? What exactly happens when therapy, instead of making things better for you, actually makes it much worse for you, right? So, like I said, we were talking about Courtney. We were talking about how her therapist or her psychotherapist was, in fact, acting very weirdly and making her feel very uncomfortable, right? Now, soon afterwards, as soon as she started realizing, he's probably not who he seems to be, she actually terminated her sessions. And last autumn, she in fact self published this book, which is basically about her experiences, right? And the name of this book is something called When Therapy Goes Wrong, a personal examination of an unregulated industry. And I think, in my perspective, actually, in my the way I say it, the fact that it's unregulated makes it much easier for people who call themselves therapists, who call themselves, hypnotherapists and whatnot, to actually abuse their sense of authority to do untoward things that they're not supposed to be doing, simply because it is an unregulated industry, right? Now, in her book, she does in fact discuss number of ways in which therapists can be harmful, from inappropriate comments and gaslighting to even drinking with clients and telling them they're beyond help, right? And one of the biggest issues for me, or one of the biggest problems that I have, is the fact that you go to a therapist, you go near someone who is qualified as a therapist to talk about your problems, to open up about all these traumatic experiences that you've had, right? And when you go there to talk about those traumatic experiences, when you go there to tell them about all these terrible things that happened in your life, and they abuse the power that they have, and they traumatize you even further, then doesn't that actually impact our mental health? It takes us to this breaking point where you can't even talk to the therapist about your problem, because the therapist is going to abuse you as well. So who can you talk to? And mental health is not something that you can play around with, right? I mean, it's not something funny. And I definitely, we need to stop stigmatizing mental health problems so much. And I have to agree, things are relatively better than it used to be. However, having said that, that doesn't mean that it is okay for you to keep stigmatizing people who have mental health problems, right? And that is my issue here as well. You can't stigmatize these people, you can't make them feel like they're beyond help, or you can't gaslight your clients, you can't have inappropriate comments. And one of the biggest problems that I have with humanity right now is, why can't you just keep your disgusting, or inappropriate thoughts, comments to yourself? Like, why do you have to open your mouth and say it? Is it really, really important for you to say it? Do you have to say it? Will you not fall asleep at night if you don't say it? And regardless of whether it's therapy, even when you're on social media, people will have something terrible to say about you. Like, why would you want to do that? Just stop. Don't. Why are you being so unkind? It definitely doesn't help you to be so unkind. It's not good for your body either. So much of negative energy is definitely not good for your body. So obviously, in when you're thinking of things like that, therapists do have a higher role, they have a higher duty than other people, to make sure that their clients, their patients feel much, much safe. And they feel like it's an environment that they can open up in, right? So that is very, very important, right? And because, like I said, this is an unregulated industry, there is a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of things that have gone wrong as well. So then we need to ask ourselves, then we need to discuss, look, what are we doing to address this problem? What are we changing? Have we changed anything? Because right now things haven't really changed all that much for people who want therapy, and people who, especially in terms of the regulation within this industry, right? So, like I was saying, Courtney published this book, and she was talking about how how these experiences actually made it very hard for her to open up and to trust people and tell them about their problems, because she was scared that it would result in her going through that same abuse, it would result in her going through the same amount of harassment over and over again, right? So that is why she didn't want to or rather, that's what she talks about in her book, right? Now, before publishing her book, Courtney actually complained to the association that Michael was registered with, and the complaint was closed by the committee due to insubstantial evidence. And Courtney, in fact, later pursued legal action against him. Okay, and that's another problem that we have here in within the system as well. Sometimes, no matter how many times you complain about someone, you'll always it won't go far, because you'll always have this insubstantial evidence, or the evidence isn't enough, so we have to close the case. Which, in terms of the victim, in terms of the victim's perspective, and how the victim is now going to go out into society and talk about the problems, those things make it very, very hard for victims to come forward with their stories. Because the moment you come forward and tell someone about your story, everyone's gonna be like, oh, you know what, we don't have enough evidence, you're probably making this whole thing up because you want to be famous. Which is like the most terrible way that a lot of us, or a lot of media industry, or a lot of media companies, a lot of other companies actually deal with this issue. And we know that it has in fact harmed a lot of people. Because if you take the United States of America, for example, we've heard so many stories about, or we've heard how many or rather so many allegations about, about sexual assault, about abuse, or rather abuse allegations and whatnot. And no matter how many victims are there, no matter how many victims come out there and actually talk about it and tell their whole story, when it goes to court, it just comes back as, oh, there wasn't enough evidence. So in terms of that, we, in terms of our justice system as well, there are some changes that need to be made, just to make sure that these victims are protected, from the system. So going back to the story, she wrote this book, she published it, and she actually also pursued legal action. So when she released the book, so many people actually came forward and said, I've had a similar experience and nobody believed me. And in her perspective, she was thinking, how many people out there that nobody is listening to, you know and we need to understand that if so many people came forward and said, look, I've been through this exact same situation, but when I was talking about it, nobody believed me, then that again in itself just goes to show how there is a huge, gap in terms of these victims, in terms of these perpetrators, and how justice is served to these victims, right? And this is not the first time, and this definitely won't be the last time either, because we know that in certain systems, especially when it is centered around assault, when it's centered around harassment and abuse, um more chance more often than not, what happens is these abusers, they get to get away with what they do, and the victims don't get any justice, they have no reparation, and they just have to suffer for the rest of their life. So really, in their perspective, it's not really helping them. And that is a huge problem, a huge issue that we have here in the United Kingdom, right? Now, more than 1.69 million people in the UK were actually referred to NHS talking therapists between April 2019 and March 2020. Right, and countless more actually sought help from private practitioners. And the NHS website also says that most of its psychotherapists are in fact clinically qualified, right? And that's why, as we move forward, we need to sort of figure out, we need to realize, or we need to focus on the fact that, hey, look, we need to really start regulating this industry, because every day, as every day passes, we begin to see, people are definitely more open about their experiences, although they don't always get them, get the reaction they would want to receive, although they don't always get that. Victims are in fact more willing and open to actually come forward and tell their own stories. And look, what doesn't add up to me is that we're talking about mental health, right? So when we're talking about mental health, you need to understand that, we're talking about people's experiences, we're talking about the things they've gone through. So in that instance, regardless of whether you consider it a big problem or a small problem, it is a problem to them, right? And it is something that has had a huge impact on them. So we're also promoting this ideology of, hey, you know what, let's listen to people have problems, let's talk to them, let's listen to them, let's talk about why exactly they have so many issues, and let's try to help them. But also, after having said all of that, when they have problems with their therapist, when they come forward and say, look, I did try therapy, I did try, going near someone and talking to them, but the moment I did that, what happened? Like, he started abusing me, and he started making me feel very uncomfortable. So when you then begin to complain about this, the therapist, no one is actually going to believe you. So why is it that we only believe a certain amount of things, or a certain um a certain, certain experiences? Why do we pick and choose these experiences we want to believe and we don't want to believe, right? And that is a huge problem. Or, in terms of the way we see things, in terms of the way we perceive things, that is a problem as well, right? So like I said, more than 1.69 million people in the United Kingdom here are actually referred to NHS talking therapists between April 2019 and March 2020, right? So there's also this whole widespread acceptance that therapy can change lives, right? A 2020 survey from YouGov and the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy actually found that 86% of people believe that it's better to talk about their problems than to take medication. However, having said all of that, having done all of that, there's also very little mainstream discussion about transgressive and abusive therapists, and even less about well meaning therapists who are inadvertently damaging, right? And in such a unique and emotional relationship, how can you tell exactly, when a therapist has crossed the line, and what should you do when something goes wrong? Now, these are questions that a lot of people have, especially, people who've gone to therapists, who've been in situations like this, and they've gotten abused, and they've had, transgressive and abusive therapists. So that is very important. We need to really start focusing on it as well, because look, we understand that, therapy can be life changing. Therapy can definitely help a lot of people out there. However, having said that, it also, you also have this question about, look, if therapy helps you and therapy helps everyone, well, we need to understand that not all therapists are good. Not all therapists actually have the best intentions in mind. And the fact of the matter is, there's almost little to nothing about being discussed about these therapists who are transgressive and abusive, and that is a conversation we need to have moving forward. Right now, make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break, and after that we'll be back to keep talking to you about what exactly happens when therapy goes wrong. So make sure you stay tuned.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense.
They can't accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I'm very, very excited to be here because it is a beautiful Tuesday morning. We're having a very important and even interesting conversation about what exactly happens when therapy goes wrong. What do you do when therapy goes wrong? And, what exactly can you do when therapy goes wrong, right? Especially given the fact that therapy, therapists, psychoanalysts, hypnotherapists, those are actually unprotected terms in the UK, and therapy is in fact an unregulated industry in the United Kingdom. What exactly do you do when things go wrong? Who do you ask for help? right? That's what the conversation is about, and that's a conversation we're currently having on Relax Radio. So make sure you stay tuned, because I'm very, very excited to be here to share these thoughts, to share these, opinions and experiences with you. And you can do that too. You can actually share your thoughts and experiences if you have any with me. All you need to do is just text me on 07852473473 and get in touch with me. Share your thoughts, share your experiences, tell me everything that you want to know, especially, or that you would like to share. Or if there's anything you want to know, make sure you do that as well, because we all know we've gone through terrible situations, we've gone through tough situations. And even though we've gone through those tough situations, even though we've gone through those terrible situations, we've come out stronger, right? Or we're still trying to come out of it. And don't worry, I believe in you. I believe that you're strong enough to get through whatever it is. That's why we're made. That's why we are given such tough things to go through, because whoever it is there up there actually thinks that we're capable of going through it. So don't worry, and I'm here to help you as well. So make sure you stay tuned, right? Now, don't forget to download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. Make sure you go download the app. Make sure you stay tuned in, because that way you can listen into the conversation at any time of the day, at any part, from anywhere in the world. Okay, so make sure you do that. And also, don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that's definitely going to help you understand, or rather be informed and updated about everything that happens here in the United Kingdom and the rest of the world as well. So make sure you do that. But right now, let's actually head back into our conversation, right? I have a conversation about a conversation about therapy. What happens when therapy goes wrong, and in such a unique and emotional relationship, how can you actually tell when a therapist has crossed the line, and what should you do when something goes wrong? Now, Glenys Parry, who's actually an emeritus professor of psychological services research at the University of Sheffield and the author of a number of papers about therapy risks, actually had some thoughts to share with us on this matter. So he thinks that, or rather, he thinks that the most common ones are the therapists getting out of their depth. They work with a certain complexity and the severity of problems that they're really not trained to do, she says. Okay, so this is what she says, and it's important for us to know that, or it's important for us to be aware as well, that the most amount of problems, or the highest amount of problems, actually happen when there are these therapists out there who actually do things that they can't even handle. They take too much on their plate, they take too much than they can, what they can actually chew, right? And what happens is, because these problems are so complex, they are in fact very severe, they can't actually handle it, and they don't know what exactly to do. Now, some therapists can actually be too rigid, or they don't listen enough. And another reason therapy can be harmful is that the therapist is actually psychotoxic. Okay, now what that means is this is where the therapist's behavior directly harms a client's mental health or well-being. So for example, you undermine their confidence or their self-esteem, or you even foster this sense of unhealthy dependency between the patient and the therapist, right? And what happens in instances like that is that, even though you're actually okay, so for example, if you have already created this level of unhealthy dependency, you can be okay, right? You will be completely fine. However, even though your problems are okay and you feel better, you feel like you can't survive with your therapist, so you will continue going to the therapist, because you think, look, even though my problems are solved, even though I feel better, it's actually going to get much, much worse if I don't have my therapist with me. Now, that is what happens as well. And some of these psychologists, some of these therapists are in fact very, very psychotoxic. And that's why there's a lot of issues with regard to the way therapists treat their clients, with regard to the way that therapy happens in some instances, right? So Courtney actually said that she experienced a number of red flags during her sessions with Michael. Okay, so the first thing that he did was he always loved to make the conversation about himself. And forget about therapists, there are also some other people out there who always love to make the conversation about themselves. Like, you can be talking about one of your biggest problems, and they'll say, oh, you know what, like, your problem isn't even that bad. Like, I've definitely gone through much worse problems. And that is the worst thing you can say to someone. Like, no, no, that is a big red flag. Like, don't say that, right? So one of the biggest red flags that she had with her therapist was that he always liked to make the conversation about himself. So when Courtney told him that she had done a 3 kilometer run one week, He actually replied that he can run 5 kilometers in 23 minutes, which is quite impressive for a man of his bulk. And he specifically said that word to word. And another thing he would do is that he would often eat during the sessions, and he never ever took notes. So, how exactly are you going to be, comparing and trying to figure out what exactly is wrong with your client, what exactly is wrong with your patient, and how much of, development they've had if you're not going to take down any notes? Now, I know, like, obviously, there are some therapists out there who are absolutely amazing and they don't always take notes. Sometimes they do. And the truth of the matter is, if you're going to, properly monitor your patient, you have to take some notes. You have to make sure that there is a sense of professionalism between the two of you, because ultimately this is your job, right? This is not just, a random friendship that you have. It is in fact your job. This is basically what you do because you want to make sure that your clients feel safe. You want to make sure that your clients rather get over their problems. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So, however, going back to Courtney's therapist, right? He also he never took notes during any of their sessions, and he always ate during their session. And what happened was her mental health did in fact start deteriorating because it wasn't actually helping her, and she began self-harming. And when he asked to see her cuts, he literally just said, that's not so bad, I've seen much worse. Like, what kind of therapist says that? Even, even if you weren't a therapist, and if you were just a normal person, someone who wasn't qualified enough to understand mental illnesses and how to treat mental illnesses, then you would never ever say, that's not so bad, I've seen much worse. Like, that is not something you tell someone who is self-harming, right? And Glennis Perry actually says that experiences like this can actually cause lasting harm. And it's quite obvious, right, as to why it can cause lasting harm. And I don't need to, get into it bit by bit and explain everything to you, because obviously we need to understand that when you're going to say things and make them feel like their problems aren't as big as the rest of the world's, they're going to feel bad. It's going to have a lot of lasting harm, right? And some people, in fact, have very negative relationships with a therapist. And when they do have those, negative experiences, that can actually put them off therapy for life, or it can even make them quite ill. So obviously, when you have a bad experience with one therapist, and if you're someone who has had, other traumatic situations in your life, you're not going to purposely put yourself in that same traumatic situation, in that same instance, because you don't want to go through all of that pain. You don't want to go through all of that trauma. No one does, right? So obviously, what happens in instances like that is that it completely cuts you off from wanting to go to therapy, from even, you considering the fact that if you go to another therapist, it might actually help you, right? And one 2016 survey that was actually led by the Royal College of Psychiatrists found that 1 in 20 people actually reported lasting bad effects from their therapy. And most of these people were in fact from minority, ethnic, and LGBTQ plus backgrounds, and they were much more likely to encounter these problems as well. Okay, now let's also talk about, why exactly therapy can be traumatic, what exactly happens when you go through these traumatic situations and whatnot, and how some of these therapists actually follow certain stereotypes. They reach their own conclusions, and they don't really help you get better, or they don't even help your problem, right? Now, Perry says that discomfort and facing up to traumatic memories can in fact be a necessary part of therapy, right? But a good therapist should always explain this to the client. And I think that's the duty, right? You have to always explain to your client, look, we're going to be discussing this now, and it will result in you, feeling terrible. It will result in you feeling angry and sad and bad and disappointed. But the truth is, we're doing this so we can understand why you are feeling this way. So you can, come to terms with it, so you can accept it and then move on and live a much better life, right? The therapist really needs to explain this to their client, right? And in good therapy, the therapist actually checks regularly whether it helps, okay, or whether this is what they need. And this is something important that a lot of therapists need to do, especially if you're a good therapist, especially if you want to have the trust between you and your client. You always need to make sure you ask them, you check up on them and ask them, look, is this helping? Is it making you feel better? Do you need this right now? Should we do this later on? Those are important questions to ask, and I think that this is something that a lot of therapists should start implementing, especially if they're not implementing it right now. Now, make sure you stay tuned because right now we're actually going to head into a small break, and after that, we will be back to keep talking to you about therapy and what exactly you do when therapy goes wrong. So, make sure you stay tuned.
Cycling in London is not child's play. How to be a better cyclist. Listen to my show, only on Relaks Radio. I'm Kevin. Join me every Thursday, 5 p.m. Look forward to seeing you. Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much has changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, I'd say to me, you had one to forget. That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, you had one to forget. Get over it. And that was it. So I'd dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of lose. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much. A lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I'm very, very excited to be here on this beautiful Tuesday morning. It is the second day of the week and something to be excited for because look, Monday's already gone, right? So make sure you stay tuned to the sunrise with me, Sarah, because I will be keeping you company all the way until 9 a.m. And I do have a lot of interesting thoughts and information to share with you, especially in an industry that is as unregulated as the industry of therapy and whatnot. So make sure you you stay tuned because we're going to be having a very interesting and important conversation regarding it. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But before we head back into the conversation, I want to very quickly remind you that you can, in fact, be a part of the show. All you need to do is just text me on 07852473473 and share your thoughts, your opinions, your experience, whatever it is that you want to share with me. Make sure you do that because it's definitely going to help you have a better conversation with me as well. Okay, so make sure you do that. Now, before we actually head back into the conversation, you can also go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And you can also head on over to our social media pages, go follow them, like them, request, or rather, go comment on the polls, give your thoughts, your opinions. We have all of that on our social media, so make sure you do that because it's definitely going to help you share your thoughts with us in other ways as well. Okay, and something else you can do is to go download the app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. It will help you be aware, it'll help you stay updated and informed about everything that happens, not just here in the United Kingdom, but actually, all around the world as well. Okay, and if you can see me adjusting my hair right now, well, it's because I have very, how would I say, problematic hair. It's very disruptive and it always gets in the way. So that's just how my hair is. But I love it. We have a love hate relationship. But to get back into our conversation, we were talking about trauma. We were talking about how sometimes in therapy you have to face traumatic memories to make sure you get over it, you come to terms with it, and you accept it and move on, right? But a good therapist will always ask you, is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if you do this now? Is it okay that you're going to experience these negative feelings because you're going to go through them, and we're going to put ourselves in that same situation you were in a few years back. So those are important questions that a good therapist will always ask. Now, Glennis Perry has in fact done a lot of research on the psychotherapeutic alliance, right? Which is basically this good alliance, and it means that there is this bond between the patient and the therapist, and an agreement on what goals and an agreement on what the goals of therapy are and how to reach these goals. Okay, so the problem actually happens when the therapist and the client haven't gotten enough trust or even enough psychological safety to be able to say, this is very hurtful, I just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere and I feel worse. Okay, that's the problem. They haven't in fact established enough of a bond where they can trust each other enough to say that, look, I don't want to go through this. It's traumatizing for me. It just makes me feel worse every time I go through it. Okay, so sometimes when you don't have a good enough relationship with your therapist, things like that happen. Okay, now another question that you have is sometimes you go near your therapist and you feel better, and then you stop going near your therapist, and then y'all get into a fight because your therapist still wants you to keep coming even though you're good. And that's another problem as well. This is something that basically qualifies as a rupture. So, how can you actually tell what qualifies as a rupture that you can overcome, as opposed to something that's crossed the line? Now, the BSEP's ethical framework actually provides a comprehensive list of expectations for therapists that range from protecting client confidentiality and even keeping accurate records to not abusing clients financially, emotionally, physically, sexually, or spiritually. Right now, that is a comprehensive list of expectation for therapists. But Perry, in fact, stresses that determining harm can, in fact, be very, very complex. Partly because there is some discomfort that we all face, that some discomfort is necessary, especially in therapy, right? It is a part of therapy because patients have these existing difficulties with relationships, and partly because some clients and therapists simply aren't a good fit in terms of personality, right? You always need a personality you will get along with to actually open up to that person and tell them about your problems. Now, a rupture can actually occur because of the misunderstandings on either side, and when I say either side, obviously I'm referring to the therapist and the client. Sometimes there can be misunderstanding on both the side of the client and the side of the therapist as well. So in instances like this, therapist may actually need to be very, very careful with their words, actually advises talking to a friend or even another therapist to actually get a second opinion before confronting that your therapist either in person, or if you feel unable to do that, then you can do that via letter or even email. So the rupture in itself is one thing, but what happens when you try to bring it up can often be most revealing, because Perry says that your therapist should address it as an open they should address it in an open, non-defensive, compassionate way. Okay, which means that if your therapist actually tries to talk about that problem, if your therapist gets very defensive about it, well, then that that conversation isn't actually going to go anywhere. So having said that, if the therapist isn't doing that, if you raised an issue and they're silencing you, then that's definitely not good. Right? You have to always make sure that your therapist is not, in fact, silencing you, that your therapist is honestly, genuinely wanting to talk to you about it and wanting to, sort of make that rupture that exists between the two of you disappear. Right? And if your therapist is unresponsive to your concerns or continues to even behave transgressively, you may actually be able to report them. So if they continue behaving transgressively towards you, you can actually go report them and make sure that you have a much safer space to talk about your feelings and your thoughts and whatever emotions and feelings that you're going through. So it's important for us to keep that in mind. It's important for us to think about it as well when we are choosing therapy. So make sure to keep that in mind and make sure to stay tuned, because right now we're going to end this, but we will be back in a few minutes to actually keep talking to you about how exactly we can make the streets much, much safer for women. Okay, so make sure you do that. But right now, I'm going to end this and I will be back in a few minutes to keep talking to you about how to make the streets a much safer place for women.